Uh, I'm going to show you in order the books I wrote and why I wrote them. The first book actually wrote itself. When I finished school teaching, I was filled with fury at the 30 years of my life I had devoted to this institution. I had trouble going to sleep at night because I was so angry, and I had trouble getting up in the morning and greeting the new day. I woke up angry and I went to bed angry at night. So I thought I'd discharge some of this anger by trying to catch lightning in a bottle, trying to make the experience of 30 years fit into an essay called The Psychopathic School, in which I described the pathologies I thought grew out of this kind of confinement experience. I had no sooner written that and used it as a Teacher of the Year speech when a little magazine reprinted it, and somehow the magazine got to India, and I got a call from Nehru University saying they would like to use the talk as the graduation address. And furthermore, they'd like to publish the talk as a little book, a chapbook, but that it was kind of skimpy to fill a whole book. Did I have a few other essays that could wrap around it, could be a setting for the psychopathic school? Well, I thought about that, and it occurred to me that as I described the pathologies that school children display to an incredible degree, I hadn't written about my part in creating those pathologies. And so I wrote a second speech, which actually became the New York State Teacher of the Year speech, and it was published elsewhere. And soon there were 700 versions of it circulating the world there. So I had done a piece of the undone work by fingering myself and my colleagues in our role in creating these pathologies. There were other aspects of the school business that weren't so obvious as crazy children and crazy school practices. And I thought I owed it to a book to deal with those two. So in 5 different ways, I distilled my school experience, and it became Dumbing Us Down, the Hidden Curriculum of Compulsory Schooling. And even though the publisher was a small publisher and never spent a nickel on advertising the book, word of mouth has caused to date 150,000 copies of this book to sell. The second book, The Exhausted School, and here you see me when I was a little bit lighter in weight in 1991, in white tie and tails, the only occasion for me ever to wear white tie and tails in my life. I've worn a tux a number of times. This is on the stage at Carnegie Hall. I had just exited the teaching business in July, and I wanted some way to make a public mark, sort of to draw my toe in the sand in some public arena and throw down a gauntlet to the school business. Now, it's bizarre to think of a junior high school teacher renting Carnegie Hall in New York City to do that. But I knew if the venue wasn't celebrated, I sure wasn't celebrated. So there wasn't much likelihood of this gauntlet ever being picked up and examined. Fortunately, some of my former students came up with the money to hire Carnegie Hall. If you're ever planning to do that, I want you to know that it's the most heavily unionized concert hall, I'm sure, in the world. There are thousands of pages of union regulations. If you go 60 seconds over the limit of your performance, you owe $15,000 more. If you want a piano on the stage to play a number, that's $6,000. We did pay that, and we had Mozart as the backdrop as the audience came in, and during the intermission at the end as they went out. I said, as long as I'm going to get into a monkey suit, white tied tails, I may as well go whole hog. And anyway, it wasn't my money. Isn't that a school teacher for you? The Exhausted School wasn't a solo performance at Carnegie Hall. I drew together, I believe, 6 alternatives to institutional schooling that were up and running and were quite successful, and I wanted the audience to see that there were a whole variety of ways to do this education thing. So my own words are about 1/3 of this book, and the remaining 2/3 come from the Holt people in Boston and from the Waldorf people, from their training college in upstate New York, and from other examples of a different way to do this thing. The 3rd book I wrote also wrote itself. This is an assemblage of speeches I made between 1992 and 1999, each one of which attempts to examine some aspect of this wacky institution. Now, every piece of this will resonate with some part of your consciousness if you went to public school. In other words, my goal is not to tell you things that you don't know in this book. It's in fact to have you ask yourself, I've known this for years, why haven't I done something about it? I hope someday to combine dumbing us down and a different kind of teacher and have a book-sized book. The last book took 10 years to write. I began it slowly in 1991, and by 1993, I was working around the clock, 7 days a week, January the 1st to December 31st. It was the principal activity of my life, the underground history of American education, which is 310,000 words long, and in fact at one time was 600,000 words long. When I looked at this pile of typescript pages, I said, nobody is going to work their way through this book. So I picked out hunks of it and threw it away. But the 310,000 words that remain constitute a mosaic that adds up to an explanation of all the inexplicable aspects of schooling, from standardized testing to grading to a trivialized curriculum, and on and on. There were 10 years of digging, at least 2,500 books read, many, many, many hundreds of interviews, lots of reflection, It's a full-time job of 10 years. And oddly enough, I'm still working at it. The next edition should be out in 60 days. It probably will have the same cover, even though I've purchased different cover art. I don't want to delay bringing this edition out. And the next edition has substantial changes in it, even though this earlier edition and the one that preceded it capture the argument and prosecute it the same way. I simply dug a little bit deeper. Also, I corrected the misspelled words and the bad grammar, which is very embarrassing for an English teacher.